Imagine this. In the sweltering heat of a southern auction house, an elderly woman stands trembling on the block, her body worn by decades of unimaginable hardship. The crowd jeers, bidding pennies for what they see as worthless flesh. But then, a single voice cuts through the mockery like thunder. 450, and the room falls deathly silent. Who was this mystery bidder? And what secret from the past would turn ridicule into reverence? This is the forgotten tale of unbreakable bonds, hidden courage, and a love that defied an entire nation's chains. Stay with me. You won't believe what happens next. My name is Emily Johnson, though most folks called me Mama Emily, and I was 68 years old when I found myself standing on the auction block in Charleston, South Carolina. My body bent with age, and my spirit nearly broken by a lifetime of bondage. The year was 1852, and I had been a slave for every single day of those 68 years, born into chains and expecting to die in them. The auction house was a place of unspeakable horrors, where human beings were bought and sold like livestock, their worth measured only by their ability to work and produce profit for their masters. I had been brought here from the bankrupt Elmwood plantation where I had worked as a house slave for the past 7 years, ever since being sold away from the only family I had ever known. Standing on that wooden platform, I felt the weight of every year, every sorrow, every loss that had accumulated over my long life of servitude. My hands were gnarled with arthritis. My back was bent from decades of labor, and my legs could barely support my frail frame. I knew that I was what the auctioneers called damaged goods, a slave too old and weak to be of much value to anyone. The other slaves being sold that day were mostly young and strong, field hands and house servants, who would command good prices from the plantation owners and merchants who had come to buy human property. I watched them with a mixture of pity and envy, knowing that they still had years of suffering ahead of them, but also knowing that they at least had value in this terrible marketplace. Lot number 47, the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the crowded auction house. Emily, age 68, house-trained, good for light domestic work. Bidding starts at $75. $75. That was what my entire life was worth to these people, less than the cost of a good horse or a piece of farm equipment. I stood there with my head bowed, trying to maintain what little dignity I had left, while strange men examined me like a piece of merchandise they were considering purchasing. She's pretty worn out, I heard one potential buyer say to another. Probably not worth the trouble of feeding her through the winter. She might be good for watching children or light cooking, replied his companion. But you're right. She doesn't look like she's got many years left in her. I had heard such conversations countless times over the years, as masters discussed the slaves they owned, as if we were nothing more than tools to be used and discarded when they wore out. But hearing it now at my age, with my body failing and my prospects so dim, it cut deeper than it ever had before. The truth was, I was tired. Tired of being owned. Tired of being treated as property. Tired of watching the people I loved being sold away from me like cattle. I had raised children who weren't my own, had cared for families who saw me as nothing more than a convenient servant, had given my entire life to people who would never see me as fully human. But there was one memory that still burned bright in my heart. One relationship that had made all the suffering bearable. The memory of 2 children I had raised as if they were my own. A boy and a girl who had called me Mama and had loved me with the pure, innocent affection that only children can give. Henry and Sarah Thompson had been 5 and 3 years old when their mother died of fever, leaving their father, Master Elias Thompson, with 2 small children and no idea how to care for them. I had been working as a house slave on the Thompson plantation for several years, and Master Elias had assigned me the task of caring for his motherless children. For 12 years, I had been their mother in every way that mattered. I had fed them, clothed them, comforted them when they were sick or frightened, taught them their letters and numbers, and loved them with all the maternal instinct that I had never been allowed to express with children of my own. Henry had been a sweet, sensitive boy who would curl up in my lap while I told him stories or sang him to sleep. Sarah had been a spirited little girl who followed me everywhere, chattering constantly and asking endless questions about everything she saw. They had been the light of my life, the reason I got up each morning, and the source of whatever happiness I had known in my years of bondage. But when Henry turned 20, Master Elias had fallen into debt and been forced to sell off some of his property to pay his creditors. I had been among the assets sold, torn away from the children I had raised and sent to work on a plantation where no one knew my name or cared about my years of faithful service. That had been 7 years ago, and not a day had passed that I didn't think about Henry and Sarah, wondering how they were, whether they ever thought about the woman who had raised them, whether they even remembered my name. I had heard that Master Elias had died a few years after I was sold, but I didn't know what had become of his children, or whether they had managed to keep the family plantation. Now standing on this auction block at 68 years old, I knew that I would probably never see them again. I would be sold to some master who needed cheap domestic help, and I would spend whatever years I had left in the service of strangers, who would never know or care about the life I had lived before they owned me. "Do I hear 75?" the auctioneer called out, trying to generate interest in what was clearly not a popular lot. The crowd was mostly silent, with only a few half-hearted gestures from buyers who were clearly not enthusiastic about purchasing an elderly slave. I could see the calculation in their eyes. Was I worth the cost of feeding and housing for whatever productive years I might have left? "And come now, gentlemen," the auctioneer continued. "Hey, this is a trained house slave with decades of experience. She knows how to cook, clean, sew, and care for children. Surely someone can use her services." "So, for how long?" called out a voice from the crowd, generating laughter from the assembled buyers. "She looks like she's ready for the grave already." More laughter followed, and I felt my cheeks burn with shame and humiliation. To be mocked and ridiculed while standing helpless on an auction block was a degradation that cut to the very core of my being. I was a human being with feelings, memories, and dignity. But to these people, I was nothing more than a commodity to be evaluated and discarded. $60, someone called out, clearly hoping to get a bargain on what they saw as damaged merchandise. 65 came another bid, though the bidder sounded reluctant. I closed my eyes and tried to retreat into my memories to find some comfort in recollections of better times. I thought about Henry as a little boy, how he would run to me when he scraped his knee or had a bad dream. I remembered Sarah's laughter as I chased her through the garden, playing games that made her forget for a moment the sadness of losing her mother so young. Those memories were all I had left now. The only treasures that couldn't be taken away from me, no matter who bought me or where I was sent to live out my final years. $75, the auctioneer announced as the bidding reached the minimum. Going once. That was when I heard a voice that made my heart stop. A voice that was deeper and more mature than I remembered, but still unmistakably familiar. $450, Mama Emily. The auction house fell silent. $450 was an enormous sum for any slave, let alone one as old and frail as I was. I opened my eyes and looked out into the crowd, searching for the source of that voice, hardly daring to hope that my ears hadn't deceived me. And there he was, pushing through the crowd of shocked buyers, a tall young man with brown hair and kind eyes that I would have recognized anywhere, even though he was no longer the little boy I remembered. Henry. My Henry had come for me. The crowd was buzzing with amazement and amusement at the outrageous bid. I could hear their comments clearly. E. Thompson's lost his mind. He owed $450 for that old woman. She'll be dead before Christmas. Someone should tell that boy he's throwing his money away. But I wasn't listening to them anymore. I was watching Henry's face as he made his way toward the auction platform, seeing the recognition and love in his eyes as he looked at me. He had grown into a handsome young man, but I could still see traces of the little boy who had called me Mama and had trusted me to keep him safe from all the monsters that lived in the dark. "Sir," the auctioneer said, clearly confused by the enormous bid. "Are you certain you want to bid $450 for this lot? I should point out that the slave is quite elderly and may not provide many years of service." "Here, I'm certain," Henry replied, his voice steady and strong. $450, do I hear more? The auctioneer looked around the crowd, waiting to see if anyone would challenge such an outrageous bid, but the other buyers were too stunned to respond. Who would pay more than $450 for a slave who was clearly near the end of her useful life? Going once, going twice, and sold to Mr. Thompson for $450. As the gavel fell, Henry stepped up onto the platform and approached me. The crowd was still murmuring in amazement and derision, but he ignored them completely, his attention focused entirely on me. "Mama Emily," he said softly, kneeling down so that we were at eye level. "Do you remember me? Do you remember Henry?" Tears streamed down my face as I looked into the eyes of the child I had raised, now grown into a man who had somehow found me in this terrible place and paid a fortune to buy me. "My Henry," I whispered, my voice breaking with emotion. "My sweet boy, you came for me. I promised I would always take care of you," he said, taking my weathered hands in his strong young ones. "Do you remember? When I was little and you were sick with fever, I promised that someday I would take care of you the way you took care of me." But I did remember. He had been 8 years old, sitting beside my bed during a bout of pneumonia that had nearly killed me, holding my hand and promising with all the earnestness that only a child can muster that he would never let anything bad happen to me. "I remember," I said, unable to stop the tears that were flowing freely now. "But Henry, you shouldn't have spent so much money on an old woman like me. I'm not worth $450 to anyone." "You're worth everything to me," he replied firmly. "You raised me when I had no one else. You loved me when I needed love most. You taught me how to be a good person. How could I put a price on that?" The crowd was still watching our reunion with a mixture of curiosity and mockery, but Henry seemed oblivious to their attention. He helped me down from the platform with gentle care, supporting my weight as my shaky legs struggled to carry me. "Come on, Mama Emily," he said. "Let's go home." As we made our way through the crowd toward the exit, I could hear the comments and laughter that followed us. "That boy is going to regret this foolishness. $450 for a slave who'll be dead in a year. A Thompson's got more money than sense." But Henry walked with his head held high, ignoring the mockery and criticism. He had made his choice and he was proud of it. He had found the woman who had raised him and had paid whatever price was necessary to bring her home. For the first time in 7 years, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Hope. Hope that my final years might be spent with someone who loved me. Someone who saw me as more than just property to be used and discarded. Hope that the little boy I had raised had grown into the kind of man who would honor the woman who had been his mother when he needed one most. As we stepped out of the auction house and into the bright South Carolina sunshine, I felt like I was being born again. The chains of slavery still bound me legally, but in my heart I was already free. The carriage ride from Charleston to Henry's farm took most of the afternoon, and during that time I learned about the man my little boy had become. He told me about inheriting his father's property after Master Elias died 3 years earlier, about the struggles of running a small tobacco farm with limited resources, and about his sister Sarah, who had married a merchant in Richmond and was now the mother of 2 children. "Sarah talks about you all the time," Henry said as our carriage rolled through the South Carolina countryside. "She named her daughter Emily after you. She always said you were the best mother we ever had, even though you weren't our real mother. And you and Sarah were the closest thing to real children I ever had," I replied, my voice still shaky with emotion. "I loved you both, as if you had come from my own body. I know you did. That's why I had to find you when I heard about the Elmwood plantation auction. I couldn't let you be sold to strangers who wouldn't understand what you meant to our family." I studied his face as he spoke, seeing the determination and kindness that had been there even when he was a child. But I also saw something else, a maturity and sadness that spoke of hardships and responsibilities that had aged him beyond his 28 years. "Henry," I said carefully, $450 is a lot of money for a small farmer. Are you sure you can afford to have spent so much on an old woman who can't do much work anymore?" He was quiet for a moment, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. "Mama Emily, I'm not going to lie to you. $450 is more money than I've ever spent on anything. It's enough to buy 3 good field hands or a year's worth of supplies for the farm. But some things are more important than money." "To what things?" "Is love, loyalty, keeping promises, honoring the people who shaped us into who we are." He turned to look at me directly. "You gave me 12 years of your life, Mama Emily. You sacrificed your own happiness to raise Sarah and me after our mother died. How could I put a price on that? But your farm, your livelihood will survive. I'll work harder, plant more tobacco, find ways to make up the money. But I couldn't live with myself knowing that you were suffering somewhere while I had the power to help you." As we traveled, Henry told me about his plans for my future. He had prepared a room for me in the main house of his farm, a comfortable space with a real bed, a rocking chair, and a window that looked out over the garden. He had hired a local woman to help with the heavy housework, so that I wouldn't be expected to do more than my aging body could handle. Yet, I want you to be comfortable, Mama Emily. I want you to rest, to enjoy whatever years you have left. You've earned that after a lifetime of taking care of other people. What will your neighbors think? I asked, knowing that his kindness toward an elderly slave would be seen as eccentric at best and dangerous at worst by the white community. I don't care what they think. Your family and family takes care of each other. The farm, when we finally reached it, was smaller than the plantation where I had raised Henry and Sarah, but it was well maintained and clearly prosperous. The house was a modest 2-story structure, surrounded by tobacco fields and vegetable gardens with slave quarters that looked cleaner and more comfortable than most I had seen. Henry helped me down from the carriage and introduced me to the other slaves who worked on his farm. There were only 6 of them, 2 field hands, a cook, a stable boy, and 2 women who helped with domestic work. They seemed surprised, but not hostile at the arrival of an elderly house slave who was clearly being treated with unusual respect. "This is Mama Emily," Henry announced to the assembled group. "She raised me and my sister when we were children, and now she's come home to live with us. I expect everyone to treat her with the respect she deserves." The slaves nodded politely, though I could see curiosity and questions in their eyes. It was unusual for a master to speak about a slave with such obvious affection, and even more unusual for an elderly slave to be given such a prominent position in the household. Henry showed me to my room, which was indeed everything he had promised. It was clean, comfortable, and furnished with care. There was a quilt on the bed that I recognized as Sarah's handiwork, and on the dresser was a small bouquet of wildflowers that someone had picked fresh that morning. "Sarah sent the quilt," Henry explained, seeing me touch the familiar pattern. "She wanted you to have something from her until she can come visit, and the flowers. Well, I remembered how you always loved having fresh flowers in the house." I sat down in the rocking chair by the window and looked out over the peaceful farm. For the first time in 7 years, I felt safe. For the first time in my entire life, I felt valued for who I was rather than what I could do. "Henry," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth." "Of course, Mama Emily, what is it? Why did you really buy me? I know you love me, and I know you wanted to help me. But there's something else, isn't there? Something you're not telling me?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at his fields. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "Do you remember the last day you were with us? The day Father sold you?" "I remember." I said, though the memory still caused me pain. I begged him not to do it. I got down on my knees and begged him to find another way to pay his debts. I promised I would work harder, that I would find a way to earn the money he needed. But he said it was business, that he couldn't let sentiment interfere with practical decisions. Though you were just a boy, Henry, there was nothing you could have done. Maybe not then. But I swore that day that if I ever had the chance to bring you home, I would do it no matter what it cost. I've been looking for you for 7 years, Mama Emily. I've been to every plantation auction in South Carolina, hoping to find you. But 7 years are 7 years. And when I heard that the Elmwood plantation was being liquidated, I knew you might be there. I brought every dollar I had, and I was prepared to pay whatever it took to buy you back. I reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and the strength that came from determination. "You've grown into a good man, Henry, better than I ever dared hope." "I learned from the best teacher I ever had," he replied. "You taught me about love, about loyalty, about treating people with dignity, regardless of their station in life. Everything good about me came from you." That evening, Henry's cook prepared a special dinner to welcome me home. It was more food than I had seen in months, and it was served on real china, rather than the wooden bowls that slaves usually ate from. Henry insisted that I sit at the table with him, treating me as an honored guest rather than a servant. "This doesn't feel right," I said, uncomfortable with being served by other slaves while I sat in comfort. I should be helping in the kitchen, not sitting here like a lady." "Why, you are a lady," Henry said firmly. "You're the lady who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, who loved me when I needed love most. And ladies don't work in the kitchen unless they want to." After dinner, we sat on the front porch and watched the sun set over the tobacco fields. It was peaceful in a way that I had almost forgotten was possible, and for the first time in years, I felt my body begin to relax. "Henry," I said as the evening shadows grew longer, "that I need you to know something. I'm old and I'm tired, and I probably don't have many years left. I don't want you to feel like you've wasted your money when I can't work anymore." Her mama, Emily. "You're not here to work. You're here to be loved and cared for the way you loved and cared for me when I was small. You don't owe me anything except the pleasure of your company. But the other slaves, the neighbors, they'll think you've gone soft. They'll say you're being foolish, spending money on an old woman who can't earn her keep. Let them talk. I know what you're worth, and it has nothing to do with how much work you can do." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I felt a peace that I had never experienced before. For 68 years, I had been valued only for my labor, seen only as a tool to be used by others. But here in this place, with this young man who had grown from the boy I had raised, I was valued simply for being myself. "Thank you, Henry," I whispered as he helped me to my room for the night. "Thank you for remembering. Thank you for caring. Thank you for bringing me home. And thank you for making me the man I am," he replied, kissing my forehead the way I had kissed his when he was a frightened child. Her welcome home, Mama Emily. Welcome home. The months that followed my arrival at Henry's farm were the happiest of my entire life. For the first time since I was a small child, I woke each morning without fear, without the dread of harsh masters or impossible tasks. Instead, I woke to the sound of birds singing outside my window and the knowledge that I was loved and valued simply for being myself. Henry kept his promise about not expecting me to work beyond my capabilities. My days were filled with light tasks that I chose to do rather than duties that were forced upon me. I helped with the cooking when I felt strong enough, tended a small herb garden that Henry had planted for me, and spent hours sitting on the front porch watching the rhythm of farm life unfold around me. But perhaps the greatest joy was the time I spent with Henry himself. In the evenings after his work was done, he would sit with me, and we would talk about everything. His memories of childhood, his plans for the farm, his hopes for the future. It was during these conversations that I began to understand the full depth of the man he had become. "Oh, Mama Emily," he said one evening as we sat watching the sunset, "I need to tell you something that's been weighing on my mind." "What is it, child?" "Buying you from that auction. It changed something in me. Seeing you standing there being treated like property, being mocked and laughed at, it made me realize something I'd never fully understood before." "What did you realize?" "And that slavery is wrong. Not just wrong for you because I love you, but wrong for everyone. No human being should be owned by another human being, no matter what the law says." I studied his face in the fading light, seeing the struggle and conviction in his eyes. This was dangerous thinking for a young white man in South Carolina, the kind of ideas that could make him enemies and put his livelihood at risk. "Shh, Henry. You need to be careful about saying such things. People around here don't take kindly to that kind of talk." "I know, but I can't unknow what I know now. I can't pretend that it's right to own people when I've seen what it does to them, what it did to you. So, what are you thinking of doing?" He was quiet for a long moment, gathering his courage to voice thoughts that he had been wrestling with for weeks. "I'm thinking of freeing all my slaves, not just you, but everyone who works on this farm. I'm thinking of paying them wages instead of owning them, of giving them the choice to stay or go as they please." "Henry, that's a wonderful thought, but it's also dangerous. If you free your slaves, your neighbors will see you as a threat to their way of life. They might try to stop you or worsen maybe. But I can't keep owning people. Not after what I've learned. It would be like keeping you in chains after everything you've done for me." What about the farm? How will you manage without slave labor?" "I'll pay fair wages to anyone who wants to stay and work. I'll hire free laborers if I need to. I'll find a way to make it work." even if it means I'm not as profitable as my neighbors. I reached out and took his hand, feeling both pride and fear for the path he was choosing. You're a brave man, Henry. Braver than I ever imagined you would become. But you need to think carefully about this. Once you take this step, there's no going back. And I've been thinking about it for months. Mama Emily, ever since I brought you home, I've been watching the other slaves on this farm, really seeing them for the first time. They're not property. There are people with hopes and dreams and feelings just like you, just like me. How can I claim to love you while keeping other people in the same bondage you suffered for so long? Over the following weeks, Henry began implementing his plan with careful deliberation. He called each of his slaves to meet with him individually, explaining his intentions and giving them choices about their future. I'm going to free all of you, Poe, he told them. You can stay and work for wages if you want to, or you can leave and find opportunities elsewhere. The choice is yours. The reactions were mixed. Some of the slaves were suspicious, wondering if this was some kind of test or trap. Others were frightened by the prospect of freedom, having known nothing but slavery their entire lives. But a few, particularly the younger ones, were excited by the possibility of controlling their own destinies. I'm Master Henry, said Samuel, one of the field hands. Now what if we stay? What kind of wages would you pay? No fair wages. Enough for you to rent a cabin, buy food and clothes, maybe even save a little money for the future. You'd be employees, not property. So, if we wanted to leave, then you'd be free to go with my blessing and whatever help I could provide to get you started somewhere else. In the end, 4 of the 6 slaves chose to stay and work for wages, while 2 decided to try their luck in Charleston, where they had heard there were opportunities for free blacks. Henry helped the departing slaves with travel money and letters of recommendation, and he began the legal process of formally freeing all of them. The reaction from the neighboring white community was swift and hostile. Word spread quickly that Henry Thompson had lost his mind and was freeing his slaves, and the response was a mixture of outrage, mockery, and threats. Thompson's gone soft in the head, I heard one neighbor say when he came to visit. Freeing perfectly good slaves and paying wages to it's unnatural and dangerous. What's next? Asked another. Is he going to start inviting them to dinner and treating them like equals? Henry faced the criticism with quiet dignity, refusing to argue or defend his decisions to people who couldn't understand his motivations. I'm doing what I believe is right, he would say simply. I can't control what other people think about it, but the hostility went beyond mere criticism. Some neighbors began refusing to do business with Henry, making it harder for him to sell his tobacco crop and buy the supplies he needed for the farm. Others spread rumors that he was an abolitionist sympathizer who was planning to help slaves escape from other plantations. Oh, Henry, I said one evening after a particularly unpleasant encounter with a group of hostile neighbors. I'm worried about you. These people are getting angrier, and angry people do dangerous things. Well, I know, Mama Emily, but I can't live my life in fear of what other people might do. I have to do what I believe is right, regardless of the consequences. What if they try to hurt you? What if they try to force you to take back the freedom you've given your workers? Then I'll face whatever comes. But I won't go back to owning people. I won't betray the principles you taught me when I was a child. Then what principles did I teach you? That all people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. That love is more important than money. That doing right is more important than being popular. I felt tears in my eyes as I listened to him speak. The little boy I had raised had grown into a man of extraordinary courage and principle, someone who was willing to sacrifice his own comfort and safety to do what he believed was right. I'm proud of you, Henry. Prouder than I've ever been of anything in my life, as I learned from the best teacher I ever had, he replied, taking my hand. And everything good about me came from you. As the months passed, Henry's farm became something unique in the South Carolina countryside. A place where former slaves worked for wages, where black and white people treated each other with mutual respect, and where the principles of human dignity were put into practice rather than just preached about. The farm was less profitable than it had been under slave labor, but it was more than self-sufficient. The workers, motivated by the knowledge that they were working for themselves rather than for a master, proved to be more productive and innovative than they had been as slaves. It's amazing what people can accomplish when they have a stake in the outcome. Henry observed one evening as we watched the workers finishing their day's labor. When they know they'll be paid fairly for their efforts, when they know they're respected as human beings, they work harder and better than they ever did under the whip. You've created something special here, Henry. Something that shows the world what's possible when people choose love over fear, justice over profit. We've created something special, Mama Emily. This all started because I couldn't bear to see you treated as property. Everything that's happened since then has grown from that one moment of recognition. The recognition that you were my mother in every way that mattered, and that mothers deserve to be honored, not owned. As winter approached, my health began to decline. The years of hard labor and poor treatment had taken their toll on my body, and I could feel my strength ebbing away with each passing day. But I faced the prospect of death without fear, knowing that I had lived to see the boy I raised become a man of extraordinary character and courage. "Henry," I said one evening as he sat beside my bed, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything, Mama Emily." "What is it?" "So, promise me that you'll continue this work after I'm gone. Promise me that you'll keep fighting for what's right even when it's hard, even when people oppose you." "For I promise. But you're not going anywhere yet. You're too stubborn to die on me now." I smiled at his attempt at humor, but we both knew that my time was limited. "I am going somewhere, child. And when I do, I want you to know that these past months with you have been the happiest of my entire life. You gave me something I never thought I'd have. The chance to live as a free woman, surrounded by love and respect. You were always free in the ways that mattered most. Mama Emily. Free in spirit, free in love, free in the wisdom you shared with everyone around you. Maybe so, but you gave me the chance to be free in law as well as in spirit. You gave me the dignity that every human being deserves." As I lay in my comfortable bed, surrounded by the love and care of the man I had raised, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this place. I had been born into slavery, had lived my entire life as property, had been bought and sold like livestock. But in the end, I had been bought by love rather than greed, valued for who I was rather than what I could do, and given the chance to live my final years as a free and respected human being. It was more than I had ever dared to hope for, and it was enough. As my health continued to decline through the winter of 1852, I watched with pride and amazement as Henry's radical experiment in human dignity began to attract attention from far beyond our small corner of South Carolina. Word of the young farmer who had freed his slaves and was paying them wages spread through both the abolitionist networks of the North and the plantation society of the South, creating reactions that ranged from admiration to outrage. Letters began arriving at the farm from abolitionists in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, praising Henry for his courage and asking him to share his experiences with their organizations. At the same time, he received threatening letters from pro-slavery groups who saw his actions as a dangerous precedent that could undermine the entire institution of slavery. "I listened to this one," Henry said one evening, reading from a letter that had arrived that morning. "Dear Mr. Thompson, your noble experiment in human freedom serves as a beacon of hope for all who believe in the dignity of every human soul. Would you consider speaking to our abolitionist society about your experiences? It's signed by William Lloyd Garrison himself." "And who's William Lloyd Garrison?" I asked, though the name sounded familiar. He's one of the most famous abolitionists in the country. He publishes a newspaper called The Liberator that calls for the immediate end of slavery. If he's heard about what we're doing here, then word has really spread. What will you tell him?" I'm not sure yet. Part of me wants to help spread the message that slavery can be ended without destroying the economy, but another part of me worries that too much attention might bring trouble to our workers and our community. The attention was indeed bringing trouble. Several of Henry's neighbors had formed what they called a Committee for the Preservation of Southern Values, which was essentially a group dedicated to pressuring him to return to slave labor and conform to local customs. Fire Thompson setting a bad example. Or as I overheard one committee member saying to another during a visit to our farm, if other plantation owners start getting ideas about freeing their slaves, it could destroy our whole way of life. "Something needs to be done about it," his companion replied. We can't let one man's foolishness threaten the stability of our entire community. The pressure took many forms. Local merchants began refusing to sell supplies to Henry, forcing him to travel to Charleston for basic necessities. The bank that held the mortgage on his farm suddenly demanded immediate payment of debts that had previously been manageable. Most seriously, there were incidents of vandalism and intimidation directed at the farm and its workers. "Someone cut down half our tobacco plants last night," Samuel reported one morning, his face grim with anger and worry. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. They destroyed the most valuable part of the crop. "Did you see who it was?" Henry asked. "No, but they left a note. Said this was a warning about what happens to lovers who don't know their place." Henry's jaw tightened as he read the threatening note, but his resolve didn't waver. "Double the watch on the fields," he told Samuel. "And make sure everyone knows to be careful when they're working alone. These people are getting desperate, which makes them dangerous." Despite the threats and economic pressure, Henry's experiment continued to succeed. The workers on his farm were more productive and innovative than they had ever been as slaves, and the quality of their tobacco crop was actually improving under the new system. "And it's because they care about the outcome now," explained Martha, the cook, who had chosen to stay and work for wages. "When you're a slave, you do just enough work to avoid the whip. When you're working for yourself, you do your best because you know you'll benefit from it. Are you happy with your decision to stay?" I asked her one afternoon as we sat shelling peas together. "Happier than I've ever been in my life," she replied without hesitation. "I've got my own cabin now with a real bed and a stove. I can buy my own clothes and food. I can even save a little money each month. It's like being a different person entirely." "What about the threats? Aren't you worried about what the neighbors might do?" "Of course I'm worried, but I'd rather face danger as a free woman than live safely as a slave. Master Henry gave us something precious when he freed us, and I'm not going to let fear take it away." As spring arrived, bringing with it the planting season, Henry made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He accepted an invitation to speak at an abolitionist meeting in Boston, where he would share his experiences with freeing his slaves and demonstrate that such actions were both morally right and economically viable. "I have to do this, Mama Emily," he told me as he prepared for the journey. "If my story can convince even one other plantation owner to free their slaves, then all the trouble we faced will have been worth it. I understand, child, but I'm worried about leaving you alone while you're away. These neighbors of ours are getting more hostile every day. Samuel and the others will take care of things while I'm gone, and you'll be here to keep an eye on everyone to make sure they remember what we're fighting for. Or I'll do my best, but I'm not as strong as I used to be. If something serious happens, nothing's going to happen. We've faced their threats before and we've survived. A few more days won't make any difference." But I had a feeling that Henry's absence would provide his enemies with the opportunity they had been waiting for. Without his presence to protect the farm and its workers, they might be emboldened to take more direct action against what they saw as a dangerous threat to their way of life. My fears proved justified. On Henry's second night away, a group of masked men attacked the farm, burning down the barn and destroying much of the equipment that was essential for the tobacco operation. They also left a message painted on the side of the house: "Free or lose your farm." They waited until Master Henry was gone, Samuel said grimly as we surveyed the damage the next morning. "They knew we couldn't defend ourselves without him here." "So, what are we going to do?" he asked Martha, her voice shaking with fear and anger. "Without the barn and equipment, we can't process the tobacco crop. The whole season's work could be lost." I looked around at the faces of the people who had chosen freedom over safety, who had trusted Henry's vision of a better way of life. They were frightened and discouraged, but they weren't ready to give up. "We're going to rebuild," I said, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. "We're going to show these cowards that they can't destroy what we've built here with threats and violence. But Mama Emily, we don't have the money to replace everything that was destroyed, and even if we did, they'll just come back and destroy it again. Then we'll rebuild again and again if necessary, because what we have here is worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for. Henry risked everything to give you your freedom, and you can't let a few bullies take it away from you." Over the next several days, something remarkable happened. Word of the attack spread through the network of free blacks and abolitionists in the region, and help began arriving from unexpected sources. A group of Quakers from Charleston sent money and supplies. Free blacks from Richmond came to help with the rebuilding. Even some white neighbors, who had been quietly supportive of Henry's experiment, but afraid to speak out, began offering assistance. "I don't agree with everything Thompson's doing," one neighbor told Samuel as he delivered a load of lumber. "But I don't agree with burning down a man's barn either. That's not how civilized people settled their differences." By the time Henry returned from Boston, the barn had been rebuilt and most of the damaged equipment had been replaced. But more importantly, the attack had strengthened the resolve of everyone on the farm and had attracted new allies to their cause. "Tare can't believe what you've accomplished while I was away," Henry said as he surveyed the rebuilt farm. "This is even better than what we had before. It's what happens when people work together for something they believe in." I replied, "Your workers didn't just rebuild a barn. They rebuilt their commitment to the life you've given them here. Oh, and the speech in Boston. It went better than I could have hoped. 3 plantation owners who were in the audience said they were going to consider freeing their own slaves. If even one of them follows through, we'll have doubled the impact of what we're doing here." "What about the threats? Are you worried that they'll try again?" "Well, I'm sure they will, but I'm not worried anymore. We've proven that we can survive whatever they throw at us, and we've shown that there are more good people in the world than bad ones." As summer have progressed, Henry's farm became a destination for visitors from across the country who wanted to see his experiment in action. Abolitionists, journalists, and curious travelers made the journey to rural South Carolina to witness a place where former slaves worked for wages and were treated with dignity and respect. "Oh, it's like we're living in a museum," Martha joked one day as another group of visitors toured the farm. "Here, people come from hundreds of miles away just to see free black folks working for honest wages." "Let them look," I replied. "So, the more people who see what's possible here, the more likely it is that other places will try the same thing." But the constant stream of visitors also brought increased scrutiny from local authorities and pro-slavery groups. There were rumors that the state government was considering legislation that would make it illegal to free slaves without posting a substantial bond, and that federal marshals were investigating Henry for possible violations of fugitive slave laws. "They're looking for any excuse to shut us down," Henry said one evening as we discussed the latest threats. "They can't stand the idea that we're proving slavery isn't necessary for a profitable farm." "Oh, what will you do if they try to force you to stop? And I'll fight them in court if I have to. I'll take this case all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. What we're doing here is legal and moral, and I won't let them destroy it with intimidation and threats. And if the courts rule against you, this then will find another way. Maybe we'll move the whole operation to a free state, or maybe we'll go underground and help slaves escape to places where they can be truly free. But we won't give up, and we won't go back to the old way of doing things." As autumn arrived, bringing with it the harvest season and my own declining health, I reflected on the extraordinary changes that had taken place since that day at the auction, when Henry had paid $450 for an old slave woman that everyone else saw as worthless. What had started as a simple act of love and loyalty had grown into something much larger. A demonstration that slavery was not only morally wrong, but economically unnecessary. A proof that black and white people could work together as equals, and an inspiration to others who were struggling to find ways to challenge the institution of human bondage. "Henry," I said one evening as we sat watching the sunset over the tobacco fields, "do you ever regret what you did? Do you ever wish you had just bought a young, strong slave instead of an old woman who couldn't work?" "Never," he replied without hesitation. "Buying you was the best decision I ever made. Not just because I love you, but because it opened my eyes to truths I had never seen before. Everything good that's happened here started with that moment when I recognized that you were my mother, not my property. What do you think will happen to all this after I'm gone? It will continue. It will grow. It will spread to other places and inspire other people because the truth is stronger than lies. Love is stronger than hate, and freedom is stronger than chains. I hope you're right, child. I hope that what we've built here will outlast all of us." It will, Mama Emily, because you taught me something that can never be destroyed. That every human being has dignity and worth, regardless of the color of their skin or the circumstances of their birth. That's a lesson that will live on long after we're both gone. As I sat there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the sounds of a farm where free people worked for fair wages and were treated with respect, I felt a peace that I had never known was possible. The little boy I had raised had grown into a man who was changing the world. One freed slave at a time, one act of courage at a time, one demonstration of human dignity at a time. It was more than I had ever dared to dream, and it was enough. I died peacefully in my sleep on November 15, 1860, 8 years after Henry brought me home from that auction in Charleston. I was 76 years old, and I had lived to see my boy become a man who changed not just his own life, but the lives of countless others who benefited from his courage and compassion. My funeral was unlike anything that had ever been seen in rural South Carolina. Henry insisted that I be buried in the family cemetery, alongside his parents and grandparents, with a headstone that read, Emily Johnson, 1784, 1860. Beloved mother, teacher, and free woman. She taught us that love is stronger than law, and that family is chosen, not born. The service was attended by over 200 people, former slaves who had found freedom through Henry's example, abolitionists who had been inspired by our story, and even some white neighbors who had come to respect what we had accomplished despite their initial opposition. Or Mama Emily was more than just a freed slave, Henry said in his eulogy. She was the woman who taught me what it means to be human. She showed me that love transcends race, that dignity belongs to every person, and that the greatest wealth is not what you own, but what you give to others. When I bought her from that auction 8 years ago, people laughed at me for paying $450 for an old woman who couldn't work. But that $450 was the best investment I ever made, because it bought me something priceless. The chance to honor the woman who made me who I am, and the opportunity to learn that freedom is not just about legal status, but about recognizing the humanity in every person we meet. After my death, Henry's commitment to the cause of freedom only grew stronger. He formally established the Emily Johnson Institute for Freedom on his farm, a school and training center where former slaves could learn to read and write, develop job skills, and prepare for life as free citizens. The institute became a model for similar programs throughout the South, and Henry traveled extensively, speaking to audiences about his experiences and encouraging other plantation owners to consider freeing their slaves. By the time the Civil War began in 1861, he had personally helped over 200 slaves gain their freedom, and his example had inspired dozens of other plantation owners to follow suit. During the war, Henry served as a colonel in the Union Army, leading a regiment of former slaves who fought with extraordinary courage and dedication. He carried my photograph in his uniform pocket throughout the conflict, and his men knew the story of the old slave woman whose love had transformed their commander from a typical Southern plantation owner into one of the most effective advocates for freedom in the entire country. "We're fighting for Mama Emily," Henry would tell his troops before battles. "We're fighting for every mother, every father, every child who deserves to live free. We're fighting to make sure that no human being is ever again bought and sold like property." After the war, Henry returned to South Carolina and expanded the Emily Johnson Institute into a full college that provided higher education to former slaves and their children. The college operated for over 50 years, graduating thousands of teachers, doctors, lawyers, and business leaders who went on to play crucial roles in the development of the African American community. Henry never married, dedicating his entire life to the cause of education and freedom. He died in 1903 at the age of 84, surrounded by former students and colleagues who had been touched by his life of service. His last words, according to those who were present, were, "Tell Mama Emily I kept my promise. Tell her I never stopped fighting for what she taught me was right." The story of our unlikely family, the old slave woman and the young master, who recognized that love transcends legal ownership, became part of the folklore of the American South. It was told and retold in churches, schools, and community gatherings, serving as a reminder that even in the darkest times, individual acts of courage and compassion can light the way toward a better future. The auction house where Henry bought me was destroyed during the Civil War, but a historical marker now stands on the site, commemorating the day when a young man's love for his childhood caregiver sparked a transformation that would affect thousands of lives. The marker reads, "On this site in 1852, Henry Thompson purchased Emily Johnson, the slave who had raised him for $450. His act of love and recognition led to the freedom of hundreds of enslaved people and demonstrated that the bonds of family transcend the boundaries of race and law. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of our story is not found in monuments or historical markers, but in the principle that Henry learned from our relationship and spent his life teaching to others: that every human being has inherent dignity and worth, that love is more powerful than hatred, and that the courage to do what is right can change the world, one person at a time. The little boy who used to curl up in my lap while I told him stories grew up to tell a story of his own. A story about an old slave woman who taught him that freedom is not just about legal status, but about recognizing the humanity in every person we meet. It was a story that inspired a generation of Americans to question the institution of slavery and to work toward a society where all people could live with dignity and respect. And in the end, that may be the greatest tribute to the love we shared. Not just that it freed one old woman from bondage, but that it helped free an entire nation from the moral blindness that had allowed slavery to exist for so long. The $450 that Henry paid for me at that auction was indeed the best investment he ever made, because it purchased something that no amount of money could truly buy: the opportunity to transform love into justice, compassion into action, and recognition into revolution. That is the legacy of our story, and it lives on in every act of courage, every gesture of compassion, and every moment when someone chooses to see the humanity in another person, regardless of the circumstances that divide them. Historical note: the story of Emily Johnson and Henry Thompson represents the experiences of countless enslaved people and their relationships with the white families they served. While this particular account is fictional, it is based on documented cases of former slaves who were freed by masters who had developed genuine affection for them, often after being raised by them as children. The practice of slave auctions was a brutal reality of the antebellum South, where human beings were bought and sold like livestock. The scene described in this story, an elderly slave being mocked and devalued because of her age, was typical of such events where a person's worth was measured solely by their capacity for labor. The character of Henry Thompson was inspired by real historical figures who freed their slaves and became advocates for abolition, often at great personal and financial cost. While such individuals were rare in the antebellum South, they did exist and played important roles in challenging the institution of slavery from within the system itself. The Emily Johnson Institute for Freedom mentioned in the story was inspired by the many schools and colleges established by and for former slaves during and after the Civil War. Institutions like Fisk University, Howard University, and Hampton Institute played crucial roles in providing education and opportunities to people who had been deliberately kept ignorant under slavery. The economic arguments presented in the story that free labor could be more productive and profitable than slave labor were actually made by some abolitionists and economists of the period. While the transition from slave to free labor was often difficult and sometimes unsuccessful, there were documented cases of plantations that operated profitably using paid workers. The hostile reaction of the white community to Henry Thompson's actions reflects the real dangers faced by those who challenged the institution of slavery in the antebellum South. Abolitionists and their sympathizers often faced social ostracism, economic boycott, and physical violence from those who saw their activities as threats to the established order. The Underground Railroad connections mentioned in the story were based on the real network of abolitionists, free blacks, and sympathetic whites who helped enslaved people escape to freedom. This network operated throughout the South and provided assistance to thousands of fugitive slaves seeking liberty in the North and Canada. The transformation of Henry Thompson from a typical Southern plantation owner to an abolitionist activist illustrates how personal relationships could sometimes overcome the racial prejudices and economic interests that sustained slavery. While such conversions were rare, they demonstrate the power of individual human connections to challenge systemic oppression. The story also highlights the complex emotional relationships that often developed between enslaved people and the white families they served, particularly when slaves served as caregivers for white children. These relationships were complicated by the fundamental inequality of slavery, but they sometimes resulted in genuine affection that transcended racial boundaries. The legal aspects of the story, the process of freeing slaves and the challenges faced by those who attempted to do so reflect the actual laws and customs of the antebellum South. Manumission, the freeing of slaves, was legal in most southern states, but was often restricted by requirements for bonds, waiting periods, and proof that the freed slaves could support themselves. The Civil War service attributed to Henry Thompson represents the experiences of many Southern whites who fought for the Union, often motivated by moral opposition to slavery rather than loyalty to their home states. These individuals faced particular challenges as they were often viewed as traitors by their former neighbors and communities. The educational work described in the story reflects the real efforts of many individuals and organizations to provide schooling for former slaves during the Reconstruction period. This work was often dangerous and always difficult, but it played a crucial role in helping freed people transition to life as citizens rather than property. Today, the story of Emily Johnson and Henry Thompson serves as a reminder that even in the darkest periods of history, individual acts of love and courage can make a difference. It illustrates how personal relationships can challenge systemic oppression and how the recognition of shared humanity can overcome the barriers created by law and custom. The themes explored in this story: love transcending legal boundaries, the power of individual conscience to challenge unjust systems, and the importance of education in achieving true freedom remain relevant today as we continue to grapple with issues of inequality and social justice. The legacy of figures like Emily Johnson and Henry Thompson can be found in every person who chooses to see beyond the surface differences that divide us, who recognizes the inherent dignity of every human being, and who has the courage to act on their convictions, even when doing so requires personal sacrifice. Their story reminds us that freedom is not just a legal status, but a recognition of human worth, that family is defined by love rather than blood, and that the greatest investments we can make are not in property or profit, but in the welfare and dignity of our fellow human beings. The $450 that changed 2 lives and inspired a movement serves as a testament to the truth that love is indeed priceless, and that the courage to act on that love can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities and ultimately the world itself. The echoes of Emily and Henry's story reverberate through time, a powerful reminder that love can transcend the most unjust laws, and that recognition of shared humanity can overcome even the deepest social divisions. Their story illuminates how a single act of courage motivated by love and gratitude can spark transformations that extend far beyond what anyone could imagine. What hit you hardest in this tale of redemption and rebellion? The reunion that stunned the crowd, or the quiet revolution that followed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button if it moved you, and subscribe for more untold stories from America's shadowed past. Turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter in the fight for freedom. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.